In this next video, we will solve a few equations. For this first one, we have x minus 5 equals negative 13. When we say that we want to solve an equation, it means that we want to isolate the variable. Or in other words, get an answer that looks like x equals some number. So first you find the variable, and then you figure out why is it not by itself. So in this case, the x is not by itself because there is a minus 5 on the same side of the equal sign. You use an inverse operation to get the x by itself, or to isolate the variable. So the inverse of subtracting 5 is adding 5. And we'll use the addition property of equality by adding 5 to both sides of the equation, and negative 5 plus 5 is 0, or in other words, it cancels out, and leaves me with only the x on the left-hand side of the equation, and on the right side, I've got negative 13 plus 5, which is negative 8. When you're solving equations, it's always a good idea to go back and check your work. To check your work, you take the answer and you plug it in to verify that it's a solution. Remember that a solution means that when you substitute it into the original problem, you get a true statement. So we're going to plug in our answer of negative 8, and we're going to see if we get a true solution. Negative 8 minus 5 is negative 13, so that checks. Next, we've got negative 8 equals n plus 4. First, we identify the variable, and we figure out why it's not by itself. N is not by itself right now because there is a plus 4. The inverse of adding 4 is subtracting 4, so I'll subtract 4 from both sides. Positive 4 minus 4 is 0, or in other words, this cancels out and isolates the n. And then on the other side, negative 8 minus 4 is negative 12. Do a quick check by returning to the original equation and replacing the n with the negative 12. So instead of negative 8 equals n plus 4, we have negative 8 equals negative 12 plus 4, which gives us negative 8 equals negative 8. So I know that this answer is correct. Next, we've got negative 4x equals 12. The x is not by itself because there's a negative 4 as a coefficient. Although it's not written, remember that negative 4x is the same thing as negative 4 times x. So the inverse of multiplying by negative 4 is dividing by negative 4. Negative 4 divided by negative 4 is 1, and 1 times x is just x. So in other words, that cancels out and isolates the variable for us. 12 divided by negative 4 is negative 3. So my answer is x equals negative 3. Don't forget to do a quick check by going back to the original problem, and rather than negative 4x equals 12, replacing the negative 4, or replacing the x with the negative 3, and check to see that that is a true equation, which it is, which means our answer is correct. Next, we've got x divided by 3 equals 24. The x is not by itself because right now it's being divided by 3. The inverse of dividing by 3 is multiplying by 3. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 3. When you do 3 divided by 3, you get 1x. Or in other words, those 3's end up canceling out. 24 times 3 gives me 72. And don't forget to do a quick check by going back to your original problem, and instead of x divided by 3 equals 24, plug in the 72. So we've got 72 divided by 3 equals 24. That does check out, so I know that my answer is correct. One last one here. Now there's two ways you could solve this problem. 10 equals negative 2/3 times x. One is to remember that you could think of this as multiplying, negative 2/3 times x, and the opposite of multiplying is dividing. However, we usually don't divide by fractions. We multiply by the reciprocal. So the inverse of multiplying by negative 2/3 would be multiplying by the reciprocal, which would be negative 3/2. So we're going to multiply both sides of the equation by negative 3/2. On the right-hand side, negative 2/3 times negative 3/2 equals 1. So we get a 1x. Or in other words, the negative 2/3 and the negative 3/2, those cancel out. On the left-hand side, when I do negative 3/2 times 10, I get negative 15. Another way that you could solve this problem is that you could think of negative 2/3 times x. You could remember that a fraction is another way to divide. So then you could say the inverse of dividing by 3 is multiplying by 3. And you could multiply both sides by 3 first. And you could get negative 2x equals 30. And then the inverse of multiplying by negative 2 is dividing by negative 2. And you would get the same solution as we did when we multiplied by the inverse. Either way, the check is going to be the same. Go back to the original problem, plug in our solution of negative 15, and verify that negative 2/3 times negative 15 is in fact 10. So this is correct.